I want to begin with reviewing where we've been with Hinduism. We're looking at the whole year, universal truth principles as we see them in all the world's religions, and we're beginning January and February with Hinduism. So just to do a recap of where we've been, we talked about desires, that Hinduism embraces desires rather than says desires are bad and you should try to repress them. They say, no, all desires are good. There's a reason for all desires. And in going towards them and fulfilling them, we find we get what we want, and then eventually we'll get tired of it, or we'll get thwarted and we realize we didn't really want it that much. So there's this dance, and they have 4 different types of desire, and we go through this journey of desires, and they'll say eventually you're going to have, once you've had your fill of all these desires, you're going to realize none of them are enough. And so the ultimate desire is a desire to know one's oneness and union in pure spirit, in the divine. And that's the ultimate desire. And it's not as linear, as they say, so we can have the desire to know our oneness and union with God, and we can still have other desires as well. So there's not these compartments, but you know the word I'm talking about. Compartmentalizations. So in looking at the desire to know our oneness and union in God, they've come up with 4 paths to know the oneness and union in God. And last week we talked about 3 of those paths. One is the path of knowledge or reflection. Through pure contemplation and reflecting, we can have revelations of truth and insight about to the nature of reality. An example of this is Ramana Maharshi, who really embodied the path of inquiry of who am I, and just staying in that inquiry of who am I, without trying to answer it humanly, going beneath the human personality answers, we get to the ultimate answer of I am that all that I am. But we're getting that spiritually, not just conceptually. Another path, a second path is Bhakti Yoga, that's Jnana Yoga. The second one is Bhakti Yoga, which is the path of love and devotion. And this comes more, so the I am is much more reflective, where we become as that presence. We see the world through and as this one power and one presence. The path of devotion, we're still getting to oneness, and with oneness, but it's through devotion. It's with. I feel a communion with the divine. There's in Zen, they say not 2, but not 1. That there's a oneness, but we come at it through total love and devotion. I love the Lord my God with my whole heart, body, mind, and soul would be a beautiful expression of this devotional path. The third path is Karma Yoga, which is a path of service, embodied by Mother Teresa, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, people who give their entire being to be of service to make this world a better place, serving the divine and getting to know the divine through their service. It's very intentional. So today we're talking about the 4th path, which is Raja Yoga, the royal path to God. And I'm using the word I'm aware of because I'm teaching foundations class, and many people in the class were saying they didn't resonate with the word God. And when I use the word God, I'm not saying the mythical guy in the sky. To me, it's the ever-presence. There's no form. It's the formless substance that is in, through, and as all creation, and yet transcends all creation. It's beyond any human concept. And spirit, divine, being of light, whatever words that you use. So it comes off my tongue fairly easily using God, but I'm inviting you, if that does not resonate with you, to please translate the word or the languaging that works for you. So the Raja, the way to enlightenment, the royal path to enlightenment is what we heard in our reading today. It's a very scientific method. And that if we follow this method, we will wake up into our enlightenment. And they say that anyone can do it. All you have to do is follow these 8 steps. This morning, I'm also going to be talking about our teaching here at Centers for Spiritual Living, which is called Science of Mind, because we have a very similar idea. Ernest Holmes, who founded this organization, had the same idea, that it's something that can be tested. He taught principles, and he said, I don't want people just to believe these. This is not about blind faith. It's about putting it into practice, experimenting with these principles, and finding, do they work in my life? So we're going to look at both of them. And the reason why we're going to look at both of them is because even what the end goal is a tiny bit different. There's a nuanced difference. And I want us as a community, because I think we're all of it, is to really explore, we're all on our paths, where we are individually with both of these goals. So in India, the goal is enlightenment, to wake up to your oneness and union in God. Ernest Holmes and much of New Thought, which is a Western teaching, is about how to bring spirit into form, how to bring the world around us into a higher frequency so that it mirrors these higher vibrations more. So we're here to express the divine in form, physically, through our health, through our relationships, through our work life, through what we are giving. So that is far more the focus of what Ernest Holmes was talking to, is how to bring the divine into form. An example of the slight difference of this, but significant, Walter Starkey he's a spiritual teacher. He's since made his transition. But I remember he was at Agape, and he came into our office, and he was talking about his experiences with Vivekananda, and who is the first Hindu guru that came to the United States in 1893, and working with Joel Goldsmith. And for this year, we're also looking at Joel Goldsmith's book, Thunder of Silence. I would say he's a New Thought mystic. But it definitely New Thought. It was about making the world a better place, healing places that are sick within us through the divine. And he said, if I had a stomach ache, he said I could go to both of them were his teachers. I would go to Vivekananda with my stomach ache, and I would go into meditation with Vivekananda, and I would be transported into these glorious other dimensions. And it was, I can't even describe it. It was it's what we would probably imagine heaven to be. And I'd be dancing in all this light, and it was free and beautiful, and then I'd come back into my body just knowing how vast and beautiful this world, these other dimensions are, but I'd still have my stomach ache. It just didn't matter to me as much because I'd open up to these divine worlds. It didn't impact me as much. When I would go to Joel Goldsmith and say I have a stomach ache, I wouldn't necessarily open to all these divine dimensions in other worlds, but I'd walk away with no stomach ache. And he said, what I realized is I wanted both. I wanted to open up to the divine world, and I wanted to have no stomach ache. So that's why we're going to look at both of these sort of scientific paths. And we'll start with Raja Yoga because I think it's a little, it doesn't have, what we heard in the reading today is that India wasn't as concerned about subjective science, because the truth is that both of these are subjective science. They're not empirical objective science. And we'll see how that looks. So in Raja Yoga, there's 8 points to their path of waking up to enlightenment. Anyone can follow these 8 points, and you too will be enlightened. So the first 2 are about clean living. Basically, don't steal, all the 10 commandments, moral life, moderation, get out of all your addictions, overeating, drinking, gambling. Just be a balanced, healthy life, clean living. Those are the first 2. Then the third one is body. Start working on your body, because when we want to sit and move into these other dimensions, what distracts us often is our body aches, body pains, and that's where Hatha Yoga, that's the yoga you see in all the yoga studios, that's where Hatha Yoga was developed. It was to do all these different asanas or postures to help free up the energy in the body so you could sustain sitting for very long periods of time. So it wasn't an end in of itself, it was a prelude to being able to sit for long periods of time without your body being a distraction. Then they do a lot of breath exercises, because the breath can be a huge distraction when you're trying to sit for a long time. And the idea is to allow the breath to get to a point where you're breathing very little. And so we get to those places of stillness, those long gaps of no breathing at all. So they have a lot of breathing exercises. So we do the clean living, we do the body, we do the breath. Then the next 2 steps are your mind. Through concentration on an object, we focus, we have controlled concentration when we still the mind. Those are the next 2 steps. And the final 2 steps, through doing all this, through the stilling everything, body, mind, heart, everything, mind concentrated, still, separation dissolves. In 7 and 8, we both know the dissolution of separation, and we know that I am it. I am all that I am. And suddenly we walk as the divine, not just to the divine or the divine through us, but as the divine. And that is quite simply is a path to total enlightenment. So are we enlightened yet? It's pretty simple. We've been doing our self-realization class, and we're saying, why aren't more of us enlightened? Which is, Yogananda is a Hindu teacher that came over to America. And he created an organization called Self-Realization Fellowship, and there's a few of us who are going through the lessons. The reason why it's subjective science, however, because if you are not having those enlightened experiences, objective science might say, well, maybe that's because enlightenment isn't real. Maybe enlightenment doesn't actually exist. That's an illusion. But that's not really what India is teaching. What they're saying is, if you're not getting to the place of enlightenment, that means those first 6 steps aren't being practiced in the right way. That perhaps your living isn't as clean as it could be, or perhaps your body isn't as still as it could be, or your breath isn't as still as it could be, or your mind isn't as still as it could be, and that we have to, you're getting focused on desires. Desires is the number one thing that distracts us from opening and awakening to our enlightened self. So really, we become the object that is being studied. It's really the scientific part, what I've come to the conclusion is not, is there enlightenment? Because I don't think anyone really goes on this path thinking that enlightenment isn't possible. Often, people who stick to this path have had an experience of the divine presence. And it's called, in Zen, it's called a kensho, when you have that opening experience where it's sort of you have a mystical experience, and it looks different, a non-ordinary state experience. It looks different for everybody. I've never heard of a non-ordinary state experience that's exactly the same for anybody. But it's enough to know that there's more to this world than our 5 senses are telling us, and so it impels us to go on this journey. So the question really, the scientific part isn't really, is enlightenment possible? The scientific part is looking at myself. I am the object of the scientific experiment, and where am I out of alignment so I can't have those enlightened experiences and sustain them? Because in Hinduism, this whole idea of awakening to God isn't about awakening to God for a moment or having a peak experience. It's about being able to sustain it as an everyday state of consciousness. And the question is why don't more people do it? And it's usually because of all of these other things that haven't been worked out, desires being the number one. So that brings us, so that's the Indian Raja path, royal path to awakening. All of those other aspects, reflection can also get you there. Love and devotion, karma and service. And what I, again, want to highlight from last week is we don't do any one of them singularly. They're all interactive. If any one of us are on the path, I think we all sort of tap into all 4 of them. We may have some that predominate more than others, but we do access all of them. I think if you're on a spiritual path to awakening and you don't have a meditation practice, then there's something core missing. I think meditation practice is not something we can skip. There's no substitute for it. But I also don't think there's any substitute for reflection and reading books. I don't think there's a substitute for loving with our whole heart, body, and mind, and I don't think there's a substitute for giving service. So really, there's no substitute for these, and we don't substitute one path for another. We just find how are they all integrated in me. That we're looking at all year, what is my path? That's how we began the year. What is my path? We are the chief executive officer of our own path. And so we get to look at the dynamics of these 4 paths. So now I want to turn it over to science of mind, new thought, of how we bring spirit into form. And this is interesting to me because I started with new thought and then moved over to the Eastern teachings. But I've met people not in this particular community, but on my journey in New Thought, who started with the Eastern teachings, who were studying some under a spiritual Hindu teacher or a Buddhist teacher, and they really loved it, but there was something missing, and they were so happy to find New Thought, because New Thought brought the practical aspect to it. It said, how does this actually interact and make my life better? And they weren't finding that. They were having states of consciousness, they loved their meditation practice, but they weren't feeling that it was actually impacting their everyday life, their financial state, their physical state, their emotional state, their relationships, their work life. And this really was the missing piece. So and even Yogananda, when he came over to the United States, he said, Americans really need to learn from people in India about spirituality. We don't have quite the spiritual depth that he experienced in India, but he said India needs to learn from America about how to really apply and make this real in the world. America's much further along in creating and bringing spirit into form. So this is an important gift that we have, and so we don't want you to say, oh, it's just all materialism or we're all so shallow. That's not what this is about. I think it's with that high ideal. I know for me it's impacted me. I don't know if anyone else was. I was raised with the Lord's Prayer. Excuse me. And then the Lord's Prayer said, on earth as it is in heaven. And I think that was sort of a vision of what's possible. If we have these other worlds that are so beautiful and the vision is to create an earth that's like heaven, then we do want to bring spirit onto earth. Not just the material for the sake of the material, but the material as an expression of the divine, of the beauty and the abundance and the opulence and the goodness and the joy and the freedom and the unbelievable grace that is the divine. So we have this practice of thinking, using our thoughts to align ourselves to create a better world. Now, there's a lot of criticism about positive thinking. Oh, if you just think, say, 20 affirmations, I'm rich, I'm rich, I'm rich, and there's a lot of jokes around it, and it's not really what we teach. We don't teach that individually I'm creating prosperity. We don't teach that I am creating anything. What we are doing is acknowledging that there is an absolute reality that is always abundant. There's an absolute reality that is unchanging, that doesn't come and doesn't go and has no opposites. One power, one presence. It is always good with no opposite. It is always absolute love. It is always absolute peace, the peace that passes all human understanding. Not as earth, as we as the humans understand it, but in a transcendent reality. And so what we're doing is not just positive thinking, I'm creating my thoughts. What we are doing is using our thoughts to align ourselves with that which already is. I am not the power. Individually, none of us has that power to create. What we do have the power to do with our thoughts is align ourselves with that which already is and allow that creation to move through us to create an alignment with heaven on earth. That's an extraordinary, powerful teaching. I love it. I can align my thoughts with the isness of pure spirit and focus on the various qualities that might feel like they're missing from my life and allow it to move through me to create, through my language, through my words, through my attention. Where our attention goes, energy flows, and we allow that to start pouring out into our world. But like the Raja method, there's problems that show up. And the problems that show up is sometimes we don't get what we're intending. We intend to have $1 million. I think I'm aligning myself with the infinite abundance of the universe. The universe has way more than $1 million. It can afford $1 million. So I allow myself to be a vehicle of $1 million, and then I don't get $1 million. I hear all the time, one of the criticisms, well, if you can do this, why aren't people winning the lottery all the time? Why aren't people walking around in mansions and everyone wealthy and rich? Why isn't everyone in this New Thought teaching perfectly physically healthy? We say that the divine is never sick, that is always absolute wholeness, perfection, and completeness, and we align ourselves with that. Why would we have any physical challenges? Why would we have any challenges at all? I was looking up last night. I had a friend who taught me to do this, and it's a real gift of reading about criticisms of what we teach, because sometimes we only teach it from one angle. But to really think deeply about something, to really understand it, I think we need to look at it from the different perspectives. But I don't have to go far. I didn't really have to look up to know the challenges with it. For anyone who's been in this teaching, it does hurt when it works sometimes, but it doesn't work all the time. And the times that it doesn't work sometimes can be painful. I know for myself, when being at Agape, one of my main mentors, Reverend Nirvana, when he had cancer. Now when he was a mentor because he radiated pure unconditional love. It wasn't his words, it was his presence, it was his being. This energy of love would just wash over the people that he was around. It was unconditional. It was the first time I really understood unconditional love, was just being around him. He was it. And then he got cancer. And there was a call out to pray for him, and it was so easy to pray and know the wholeness and the perfection of pure spirit as his life, that health, radiated and pulsated from every atom and cell of his being. It was so easy to know that, and I felt it, and I not only felt it, I know so many of us felt it. He was surrounded, the impact that he had on this New Thought community, and so we were all praying, and if there was no question in my mind that that cancer was going to be dissolved into the nothingness from which it came. Myrtle Fillmore, who is the founder of Unity, she dissolved tuberculosis. She lived at the same time as Doc Holliday, when people were dying left and right of tuberculosis. But through this healing process, she completely cured herself. If anyone that healing could happen, it was for Reverend Nirvana. I knew that. But he didn't get cured. He left his body. He transitioned. That was a very powerful moment. I know other stories, but no one as deeply personal as that one. And then I've had other ministerial colleagues who I don't know as well who have approached their challenges with cancer differently. But if they were at the fourth stage of cancer, they didn't make it. Others did. So many people have healed themselves, and that's the part that it gets difficult. So many people are ministers. So many of my colleagues are ministers because they've had powerful healings, because they have dissolved the illness into the nothingness from which it came. And it's very alive for me right now because on Friday I just heard the news that a friend who I went through ministerial school with, who was the closest person that I went through, it's like boot camp. We went through this very intense period, and I just found out she's in fourth stage cancer. And I had to be with, how am I going to pray for her? How can I honestly and authentically pray for her? Because I prayed so completely clear with Nirvana, and I had to see how I was going to pray with her. I've seen it work. I mean, I don't just hear stories. When I worked at the psychiatric hospital, I was doing the scientific method. I was praying for people, and there were times where I'd work with somebody, and there was immediate transformative healing, mystical experience with one. Other people, I did the exact same thing. I was trying to recreate. That's the whole point of science, right? Yeah, I recreate the exact same circumstance. I'm trying to create the same circumstance in me, same vibration with somebody, nothing, no change. Why is that? Over and over, I see that it happens, but it doesn't happen all the time. So where's the science part of it? One of the things that we can turn away from is the uncomfortability of not getting the answers that we want. And then we just say, oh, it just doesn't work. Because this is what happened with a lot of people when I was looking at the criticism. This is all baloney. Anyone who's experienced it working knows that it's not baloney. There's something happening here. So turning away from a scientific experiment because I don't get what I want is almost, to me, childlike. It's like, I didn't get what I want, forget it. That's not the way it works. It helps us go deeper. Another one, I'm going down the negative route, but only because it's going to lead somewhere good. Promise. Because I think sometimes we skip over if we're going to do a scientific experiment, we have to be honest. That's key on the spiritual journey. If we are not being honest with ourselves, with our friends, with our family, then we're in the spiritual bypass. Then we're in spiritual la-la land. Then we're not really anchored and grounded. So there was a Templeton, John Templeton of the Templeton Foundation. He was also a Unity guy, and he spent about $10 million, or I don't know if it was that much, it was several $1 million on a 10-year study. And what they found at the end of the 10 years is that people who were being prayed for, who were sick, who did not know they were being prayed for, they had no idea they were being prayed for, there was no statistical difference that they did better than people who had no prayer. There was a statistical difference. If you didn't know you were getting prayed for, people did get better. There was a statistical. But that one part of, if I'm praying for someone and they don't know it, there wasn't any. I'm like, I never heard that. Like, I had to find that through research. But we didn't talk about that. But it's interesting information. It actually helps to know when you're being prayed for. If you are praying for someone, to let them know that they're being prayed for. Because, in fact, our connection with one another is really key, apparently, in this healing process. That we're one, and we need to consciously accept and recognize that. So we start learning from all of these things. What we learn from science is that these are not failures. They are helping us go deeper into what is true. So one of the things that I have learned personally from my own journey on this is I don't pray for very specific outcomes. I don't pray for $1 million. I don't pray to know perfect health. What I pray to know is the divine presence of wholeness as me, or whatever that situation is. And then I trust that whatever that situation is shows up in the way that it needs to. So if I want to feel rich, and I pray to align myself with abundance so I get $1 million, I could still not feel rich. I could still feel like, how am I going to keep that $1 million? I got to keep that going, and my mind starts investing on it. I don't feel free. Sometimes we think of having $1 million, I'll be freer, I have more choices. But now I'm burdened by the $1 million. If my prayer is, I want to know abundance and freedom, then I start to feel abundance and freedom, and I don't outpicture how it shows up. Now I just align myself with the isness of pure spirit, and there's a trust there that as I start to show up, I become abundance. I become freedom, that I am the very qualities of which I'm looking for form. See, the shift is, before we were looking to form to be our answer, to be our solution. The shift from all this experimenting, from all this deep work that we're doing, is that form is not the answer. The answer is the spiritual awareness of who and what we are. What I know about my beautiful friend Alice, who has cancer, is she has spent most of her adult life doing spiritual work. She knows, and I know that she knows who she is. We've experienced it together. At the same time, this incredible energy, I know the experiences that she had. This woman is awake. She knows who she is. So now that she comes to this point in her life, she's not going through it holding on to her body saying, this is my life. She knows that's not her life. She knows who she really is. She is free. She is whole, she is perfect, and she is complete, and she doesn't know that just conceptually. She knows that through direct contact, through experience. And so our job, I believe, when we're praying, is to know that we know that this is real. It is more real than the chairs in which we are sitting, that it is not intangible but tangible in ways that we can't always imagine or claim or outline. The reason why we outline is because we want to stay in control. We believe that we can have some type of control. In Raja Yoga, in this path, if you want to know the divine, you're going to have to let go of control at one point. Because whatever control we have is human control, and it's limited and it's finite. And this presence is infinite and it has no limits. It has no limits. It is everywhere present. And we have places where it's only present here, but not here. It's going to make sure that you're going to, where those walls that you have, that spirit isn't there in that situation. It's going to say, nope, be in that situation. Spirit's there. Spirit is everything, and that is what we are praying for. That's this scientific aware of when I align myself through prayer, through this treatment that we teach, affirmative prayer. So they have their 8 steps. We have our 5 steps of prayer. As I align myself, I am opening myself to my beingness and it becoming a living reality. And this is the wonderful path, the scientific path of which we are all on, and we get to test it. What if I keep knowing peace? The one I love is when I was completely overwhelmed, when I was in ministerial school, working full-time, school full-time, volunteering, just crazy, and I had no idea how to control it. I couldn't have prayed for what I wanted if I wanted to, because I didn't know how to change it. I just started praying for peace. Peace. This is I align myself, I am peace, I am peace. And then everything in my external world started shifting, things I could have never planned. So I got all the support I suddenly needed. I wouldn't have even thought of the things that started to happen, and they started to happen for me. The organization even shifted, just for me. It's very kind of it. But I didn't try to do any of that. I didn't ask for any of that. I wasn't focused on the external. The only thing I was focused on was aligning myself with the peace that passes human understanding, that is always present no matter what the situation, circumstance, and condition. That's an experiment. I didn't know how that was going to turn out. But someone said, well, just practice the principle. And I said, what principle? They said, practice the principle of peace. So I said, okay, I'll practice the principle of peace. I didn't know. I was experimenting. That's what this path is calling us to do, to experiment, not whether it's true or not, but how it shows up in my life, to look at, I am the experiment. Where am I out of alignment? Do I say I want peace, but then my mind says it doesn't want peace? Where am I out of alignment with myself? We actually are the object of the experiment. We're not discovering whether there is I don't think we'd even do it if we were wondering if there's God itself. The thing itself, the divine presence. What we are discovering is how that divine presence is lived as us. And we are ever the experimentee. We are the object of our experiments. That's the 4th path of God, Raja Yoga. So we have these wonderful 4 paths. This week, I'm inviting you to explore all four paths, but also how you're experimenting in your life. How are you a laboratory for your spiritual awakening? And as you serve your friends and your family who are going through challenges, how can I pray and support them in the truth that I know that will serve them in the highest and best way for themselves? I lastly just want to talk about where we are as a community, because we are leaving this building. And again, the question is who are we? We're the object of our experiment. Are we the building that we are in? Are we the space? Are we the location? Or are we something much deeper? Are we a vibrational frequency of love? We want beauty. We want warmth. We want home. Are we beauty? Are we warmth? Are we home? As we operate and we move into our new locations, we're moving into a temporary location. It's for 2 months. It might be longer, we don't know, but it's a conference center, so it's definitely temporary. It's not our home. It's very different than this space here. The energy is very different than here. Who are we as we move into that new space? Not how is the space, who are we? How are we showing up? Are we home? Do I feel the vibrational frequency of God's everlasting home and ever love, peace, joy, and harmony as I walk and we express our service next Sunday in our new space? Do we let the external define us, or do we allow the internal to define us? That's our experiment. Who are we really as a spiritual community? Are we a place, are we a location, or are we a spiritual presence? I think of all the beautiful cathedrals and churches. I come from Cleveland, Ohio, and I was visiting, and I was amazed how many churches there are, like on every corner. Just not used to seeing churches everywhere. But they're so empty. There are these big, beautiful buildings that are empty. And then you go down to Agape. I know some of you have been down to Agape in Los Angeles. It's in a warehouse. There's no windows. There's nothing beautiful about this place. And yet it's so alive. You go in and you're transformed and you wake up to the pure spirit that is within you, and you feel it on every atom and cell of your being, because the vibration that the people create, the community creates, they are conscious of who and what they are. The building does not define your experience when you walk in there. There's empty, beautiful buildings, and there's a warehouse, Michael's words, that is full of light and love. Who are we? As we are going through this transition, we are in a temporary place, and we're looking for a home. We invite all your help in finding a home, and we want both. I mean, I'm not saying to limit ourselves. Absolutely open to a beautiful place that has windows and is gorgeous, but we're never going to be limited by our space if we know who we really are. That's our experiment as a community. Do we know who we really are? Okay, so we went on this wonderful journey of deepening and embodying who we really want to be. Yes? Yes? Yes. I love the yeses. All right, so let's pray. And so when we pray, we're not praying to get anything. We're not praying to fix anything. We're not praying to make anything happen. When we pray to align ourselves with that which already is. We're not creating it. It already exists. The one power and one presence, the infinite love intelligence of the universe, is in, through, and as all creation, all phenomena, all time and space and multidimensional experiences. It is in, through, and as all of it. There is no separation. There is no place where it begins and stops and something else begins. It is all time. It is all space and beyond all time and all space. It is beyond all form and phenomena. It is beyond any human concept that we can conceive, and yet it is more real than the chairs in which we are sitting. It is here, it is now, living, breathing as each and every one of us in this room. It is here and now, this entire planet, being itself, always, already. It is never limited. It is never in lack. It is always whole. It is always perfect, and it is always complete. There is no death. There is no separation in, through, and as this one power and one presence. There is only life. There is only love. There is only beauty and harmony and peace. and joy and creativity and abundance beyond our wildest imagination. It is infinite. That is who we are in this moment and for all eternity. That is who we are, not because we have willed it to be so. It just simply is, and we are choosing to become aware of it, to be conscious of it. And as we are conscious of it, we allow that power and that presence to come full fruition in every atom and cell of our being. We allow its will, its way to move through and as us, letting go of all our judgments of right and wrong and good and bad, and letting those dissolve into the oneness of pure spirit. There is no separation. There is no walls of good and bad, right and wrong. There's only this one love that transcends all of our human duality. And so we hold our beautiful physical bodies in this one love. Always, always it is loved. Always we are loved. Our emotional life, our relationships, our work life, all of it is moving to alignment with the highest vibrational frequency, to the highest good for our lives and every person that we know, for every being and every creation on this planet, all sentient life form. The one power and the one presence is being activated where there is no opposite, where there is no other. There is only good. There is only more and more and more and more and more good being expressed in form on earth as it is in heaven. It is possible, and it is possible through and as us. We are the vehicles here and now and for always. How grateful I am that each one of us is this yes. How grateful I am for this community of yes. How grateful I am for this extraordinary energy and power to be pouring through and as us wherever we are as a community. We give thanks for God as this building, for all of the love and the prayers that have been happening for decades in this building. We honor that. We give thanks for the shoulders of energy of which we've been stepped upon by being in this room, by being in this beautiful building. And we give thanks for all those organizations that have embodied spirit in this beautiful building. And we know that as we go forth into a space that is brand new, that we carry the depth of that wisdom and that love and this consciousness wherever we go. That we are not new, that we stand in the wholeness and the perfection and the depth and the wisdom of energy that has been alive and awake in prayer for decades, for centuries, for thousands of years, for all time. It is who we are now. As a community and as individuals, we are whole, we are love, we are peace. And deep abiding gratitude for the power and the presence that is awake and conscious as each of us, for our willingness to be a vehicle of that oneness and that power. Even now, I just say thank you. Thank you, infinite and eternal one, divine presence, Mother, Father, God, the all in all. And in deep and abiding gratitude, we let this word be. We let it go into the law of life, knowing that as it is spoken, it is already done. And we say together as one.
So it is. So it is. And so it is. So it is. Amen. Amen.